Okay, this one is just for a bit of fun. Yesterday we talked pretty seriously about Bilal Muhammad and why he should be getting a title shot, but in today's video we've got a fun little conspiracy theory that I saw in a chat room somewhere, and I thought we'd just run with it because I was thinking about it a little bit more yesterday at work. And it's got to do with Amanda Nunes, Holly Holm, and Kayla Harrison. Now, it all comes into play when you start to look at UFC 300 and UFC 301, which is going to be down in Brazil, which at best is going to have a main event of Pantoja, but that hasn't even been announced yet. Now, what is the theory? The theory is that Kayla Harrison is going to miss weight at UFC 300 and Holly Holm is not going to accept the fight at the new weight class. And Dana White is going to announce last minute at the press conference, what we're going to do is we'll find her another fight. Don't worry. We'll figure out what to do with Kayla Harrison because she needs to cut weight all the way down to 135, which so many people believe is completely undoable for her. Now, I know Dana White has said that she's already been doing test cuts and that she can make the weight, but I've got some shocking news for people out there. Dana White is a liar, a notorious liar, and he's lying about this. There is a very slim chance that that fight on UFC 300, Kayla Harrison versus Holly Holm, is going to happen. So what I think is going to happen is Kayla Harrison is going to miss the weight, and then about a week later, which will leave us 2 weeks from the start of UFC 301, Dana White will announce that Amanda Nunes will come back to fight at 145 pounds against Kayla Harrison, who will have already been trying to cut down to 135, who should be able to make 145 for Nunes to come back out of retirement and have that fight. Now, why do I think the UFC would do this, right? If you're going to have a conspiracy, you need to have a why. Number one, putting Kayla Harrison and Holly Holm on UFC 300 gets Kayla Harrison's name out there to the UFC audience and starts to build hype for longer. But to chuck her into a main event on a pay-per-view, MMA fans sort of have a bit of backlash when there is a WMMA main event or any WMMA fight on a card. So rather than actually have all that backlash there, what they would do is get her out there, get the fans talking about her, get the fans speculating about her, get the fans excited to see her come into the UFC on a more acceptable place on the card, right? She's probably going to be fighting somewhere in the prelims. UFC 300 is super stacked. There is nothing disrespectful about Kayla Harrison fighting on the prelims there. Kayla Harrison has had such a long and storied MMA career. If I was building a UFC card, I would have her as the opening fight of a UFC pay-per-view. I think that would be far more palatable to fans, and she is in that sort of, you know, opening fight, feature fight, definitely high up the card on a pay-per-view, but it's very hard for fans to stomach WMMA fights on pay-per-views. They tend to get a lot of backlash. So what the UFC could be doing is saving Pantoja for another card, saving him for somewhere else down the line, or maybe still having him headline, but using the power of Nunes's name and Kayla Harrison's name to help bolster up 301 and to mitigate any last minute backlash that could be coming their way by moving Kayla Harrison onto a much higher placement on the cards, a main event or a co-main event somewhere around there at UFC 301. Now, would the UFC do something like this? The UFC have fiddled with card placements before. I don't know if you guys remember back in the day when Khamzat Chimaev was scheduled to fight anytime, anywhere, any person, Nate Diaz, and then Khamzat Chimaev missed weight by about 8 pounds. And then any person, anytime, anywhere, BMF, Nate Diaz didn't want to fight Khamzat Chimaev anymore, and they had to shuffle the cards around. There is a lot of speculation and a lot of people out there that seem to think that the UFC had that pre-planned because Khamzat Chimaev versus Nate Diaz was going to sell a lot more tickets rather than Nate Diaz versus the ghost of Tony Ferguson. Tony Ferguson was well into his decline by then, and they didn't think that that was such a favorable matchup to put on the main event for a pay-per-view. And Khamzat Chimaev even let it slip a couple of times that he was told not to fight, or he was told not to make weight, or, you know, something went behind the scenes, or there was a plan, but the thing is with Khamzat Chimaev, to take him at his word on that, he speaks broken English. And, you know, when someone's speaking broken English, you don't know if what he's saying is the UFC had a plan in case Chimaev wasn't going to make the weight when he was told don't make weight. Is what he's trying to say in broken English is a doctor told him, you cannot make this weight, you cannot cut down so much, you need to stop cutting weight. And then Khamzat Chimaev goes out and does an interview, and it sort of sounds like he's admitting that there was a plan behind the scenes. Either way, a lot of people do think that there is a plan behind the scenes with that Khamzat Chimaev versus Kevin Holland, Nate Diaz versus Tony Ferguson mix-up. And to add to this as well, Dana White, last time we were in Brazil, made a last-minute fight announcement because of a draw that had happened on the previous card. And I was speaking to some people in the comments back then. Unfortunately, I don't remember who it was. It was all like back when that happened. I was speaking to some people in the comments section who were talking about how the UFC is rigged. And I was like, this is a horrible outcome for the UFC. We've just had a draw. How could the UFC be rigged? This was between Jan Blachowicz and Magomed Ankalaev. And now we've got this mess up happening down at UFC Brazil. And he said, well, UFC Brazil didn't have a main event. And now they have a perfect reason to put Glover Teixeira against Jamal Hill as a main event. They've just made a main event out of thin air within 4 weeks of needing one. I was like, oh man, that is a damn good point. Like, this draw does work in the UFC's favor. And now a similar thing is happening with Brazil yet again. We have had so many stacked fight cards that it's sort of like, what is 301 going to be? Is 301 going to be this Apex card pay-per-view that's happening down in Brazil? And when I say Apex card, I mean kind of shit card that we're going to get down in Brazil. But if you were to have this last minute UFC 300, right? You do all the fight week. Kayla Harrison is there. She's coming out. She's introducing herself to UFC fans. Everyone is talking about how she was the queen in another league. You get that Michael Chandler-esque build-up all the way through UFC 300. Then she goes and steps on the scales. She doesn't make weight. There's all this media controversy, tweets. Oh, we knew she was never going to make weight. Then you get questions at the post-fight press conference. Dana, what are you going to do with Kayla Harrison? How are you going to get your return on investment on Kayla Harrison? Dana White says, don't worry, guys, we'll have something. We'll figure out a plan, mate. She'll be right, mate. It'll be fine, mate. Another week passes by, and then you get the return of Amanda Nunes versus Kayla Harrison in a main event or a co-main event down in Brazil. All that talk of a WMMA fight headlining an event, and that kind of doesn't sell tickets as well as it should. All of that gets washed behind all of that positive news that was going into 300 and all of that controversy of Kayla Harrison missing weight, and then all of the excitement of Nunes coming back. That you could either have that, or you could announce right now that it's going to be Kayla Harrison versus Nunes at 301 and deal with all the people online that are going to be a little bit disappointed by that, especially coming off the back of people that are already a little bit disappointed with UFC 300. I think if I was the marketing team at the UFC, that is the exact way that I would plan it out so that it would be far more palatable to the fans. Now, do I think that this conspiracy is actually going to happen? Not really. No, like I said at the start of this video, it's just a bit of fun, isn't it? It's a bit of fun to speculate on whether or not this is going to happen. But let me know down in the comments, do you think, what are the percentage chances of this theory actually happening and actually coming through? Very keen to hear your feedback on that. Let me know down in the comments. If you're still here watching to this stage of the video, you must have enjoyed it in some way. So if you could go ahead and hit that subscribe button, it means so much to small creators like myself. And of course, I will see you all in the next video.